Michigan, Ms. Tlaib is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman, and thank you for this really critically important hearing. As you know, the pandemic has been, great for the richest Americans who have lined their pockets and doubled their wealth during the pandemic. As we all know, corporations have the nerve to blame inflation while consolidating their market power and raising the price of essential goods and services while working people foot the bill. For me, this is not inflation, it's extortion. Meanwhile, the same corporations who are gouging prices on consumers, on our neighbors, have been engaging in what we call the major stock buybacks. When corporations funnel their record earnings into stock buybacks, Madam Chair, that's money that they're not allocating towards capital investment, research, and development. So, Dr. Mahbood, just listening to your testimony has been really interesting to understand some of these trends. One of the things that I think we haven't looked at, and I would love for your opinion on, is what trends have we seen with regards to the major corporation and stock buybacks, particularly since the Trump tax cuts were enacted?
Thank you for that question. We're in a period where we're seeing record stock buybacks, and that's really important because that's money that's going out to shareholders, all while prices are going up. And these companies are not making productive investments in their firms, right? They're not investing in making the company work better. They're just grabbing as much profit as they can and sharing out shares to their shareholders. And tax policy is critical to this because if raising corporate tax rates or taxing excess profits is a real way to curb the amount of money that flows to shareholders and executives over productive investments in our economy.
Oh, thank you so much. And Dr. Zandi, are stock buybacks making our supply chains more resilient or bringing down prices for consumers in any way?
It's hard to connect the dots, I think, between stock repurchases and what's going on in supply chains and inflation.
But we have a record literally we have stock buybacks, right? A record number.
But that money goes to investors that reinvest. So I think that's a very tenuous kind of link, in my view. Yeah.
Okay. Today, one of the things I always say, we obviously didn't predict the pandemic would, be around the corner in 2019. But today we all know that the next crisis that will pose an existential threat to our economy is our planet. If our planet warms 2 degrees Celsius, the damage will be irreparable. Extreme weather events will be the new normal. Our communities would flood and our economy will be underwater. And these are real facts from many scientists across the world. So Dr. Zandi, we know extreme weather events like floods, wildfires, and droughts are occurring with alarming frequency due to climate change. Can you explain the impact climate change will have on our supply chains and on prices, for example, in the energy and food sectors?
Yeah, it already has, Congresswoman. I mean, for example, we talked about timber, lumber. One of the reasons for the severe problems we're having in that industry is because of the extraordinary weather events in the Pacific Northwest, particularly in British Columbia, where a lot of the timber is produced that goes into U.S. homes. So it's already having a major effect on, and it's affecting, timber supplies, where forests are growing, where they're not growing. It's a major adjustment that's adding to our costs and contributing to our global supply chain issues. So, it's not one of those things that matters a lot in any given year, but when we look back a decade from now, certainly.
Yeah, when you do nothing now, of course, the impact will be there later. I mean, look at all the lack of safety nets before the pandemic. We didn't have childcare. We didn't have a healthcare system that helped make sure that, we had pre-existing condition because of environmental racism. So I totally hear you, but I think, much of what's happening in the fact that we weren't able to save more lives during this pandemic is because of some of these broken systems and not thinking forward. Last year, a handful of dominant, shipping container firms reaped record profits while passing those costs directly onto the consumer, raising prices, y'all, by 1%, according to Kansas City Fed and the European Central Bank. Based on this evidence, I'm incredibly concerned that big corporations will simply look at the climate crisis the same way they viewed the pandemic, just another chance to make a quick buck. So, Dr. Mahbood, are we doing enough to address our supply chain fragility and exposure to climate risk? If not, what sorts of investments should our country, our federal government, be looking at?
No, that's absolutely critical because every new climate shock across the, a storm halfway across the world, when we have such a brittle supply chain, can bring the whole system crashing down. And so it's really critical that we check corporate power by using tax policy.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield.
The gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ocasio.